Did you know that Atlanta rises higher above sea level than any other major city east of the Mississippi River, producing a climate so temperate it contradicts everything people expect from the Deep South? That a forgotten 19th century city lies buried directly beneath its modern streets? And that the most consumed beverage on the planet was formulated here on a single afternoon in 1886 by a single pharmacist in what may be the most consequential accident in American commercial history? Atlanta is not just a destination. It is a collision of history, nature, ambition, and sheer improbability, so densely packed into one place that it stops feeling like a city and starts feeling like a phenomenon. So settle in, because today we are counting down 20 incredible facts that explain why Atlanta belongs at the very top of your travel list. Fact number 20. Atlanta is perched on top of a mountain, and almost nobody realizes it. The city sits at roughly 1,050 feet above sea level, making it the highest major city in the entire eastern United States. That elevation is not a trivia footnote. It shapes the city's personality. While Miami and New Orleans melt through humid summers at near sea level, Atlanta rests far enough above the coastal plain that temperatures feel measurably cooler, the air feels lighter, and the legendary southern heat becomes something you can actually tolerate. The city earned that elevation by settling directly on the edge of the Piedmont Plateau, where the ancient Appalachian foothills begin their long descent toward the Atlantic. That is why Atlanta gets real snow in winter, while Savannah only gets colder rain. That is why spring arrives here with an explosion of dogwoods rather than just more gray humidity. And that is why the horizon in every direction looks more like the edge of a highland than the flat farmland most people picture when they hear the word Georgia. Fact number 19. The name Atlanta was almost a linguistic disaster. When Georgia's state engineer proposed a name for the young railroad terminus in 1845, he floated Atlantica Pacifica, an almost absurdly grandiose mouthful, for a settlement of barely a few hundred people. Locals mercifully shortened it to Atlanta, and the name stuck. What is astonishing is what that shortened name eventually came to represent. Within a single generation, Atlanta grew from a pine-wooded railroad junction into the commercial and cultural furnace of the American South. Every major highway, rail line, and airport artery that flows through Atlanta today is a direct descendant of that 1845 decision to plant the Western and Atlantic Railroad's southern terminus on this exact ridge in the Georgia Piedmont. The city was literally born to connect things, and more than 180 years later, it still does exactly that. Fact number 18. Underground Atlanta is a vanished city that time tried to erase. After the Civil War, Atlanta rebuilt itself directly on top of its own ruins. Streets were elevated, bridges were thrown over intersections, and the original ground floor storefronts quietly found themselves swallowed below the new street level. What remains is a labyrinth of 19th century brick facades, gas lamps, and old shop fronts preserved beneath the modern sidewalks. You can still walk through parts of that buried city today, descending one flight of stairs to stand in a streetscape that last saw daylight when Ulysses S. Grant was in the White House. Fact number 17. Hartsfield-Jackson. Atlanta International Airport is the busiest airport on Earth, and the gap is not close. For more than 2 decades straight, Atlanta's airport has moved more passengers than any other airport on the planet. In 2024 alone, it handled 108 million passengers, a figure larger than the entire population of Germany. The airport runs its own underground people mover, has its own zip code, and contains more restaurants and retail shops than many American shopping malls. The geography is what makes it dominant. Atlanta sits within a 2-hour flight of roughly 80% of the U.S. population. The city is essentially the pivot point of American air travel, the place nearly every route passes through on its way to somewhere else. If you have ever flown across the American South and wondered why your layover landed you in Atlanta, now you understand. The continent itself leans toward Georgia. Fact 16. Piedmont Park is Atlanta's answer to Central Park, but with a distinctly wilder edge. Covering roughly 189 acres in the heart of the city, Piedmont provides Atlanta with its green lungs. But unlike the tightly manicured urban parks elsewhere, it sits at the seam between formal landscape design and genuine southern woodland. The park occupies the same ground that hosted the 1895 Cotton States and International Exposition, a World's Fair that drew roughly 800,000 visitors, and served as Atlanta's public reintroduction to the world after the Civil War. That same ground now holds one of America's most beloved green spaces, wrapped around Lake Claramere, stitched into the city's fabric by the Atlanta Beltline Trail, and bordered on every side by neighborhoods that would not exist without it. On a spring Saturday, Piedmont becomes one of the most diverse public squares in America, a place where the entire city seems to exhale in unison. Before we continue, hit subscribe and drop a like so we can keep uncovering the hidden stories of America's most fascinating cities together. Fact 15. Atlanta is quite literally a city grown inside a forest. This is not a metaphor. The city's tree canopy is so thick and so extensive that Atlanta is officially classified as one of the most heavily forested urban areas on the planet. Roughly 47.9% of the city's land surface lies beneath tree cover, a share that rivals the canopy of many rural counties. The reason is simple. Atlanta was not built by clearing the southern Appalachian forest. It was built by threading roads and houses between the pines, oaks, and tulip poplars that were already standing there. The effect is a city where you can be standing in a parking lot in Buckhead and feel like the woods start 1 block away, because they usually do. Local urban ecologists call it the city in a forest, and from the air, Atlanta looks less like a metropolis and more like a dense green sea with glass towers poking through it. Fact 14. The Georgia Aquarium is the largest aquarium in the Western Hemisphere. When it opened in November 2005, it was the largest aquarium anywhere on Earth. It held that global title until 2012 and remains the biggest on this side of the planet today. It holds more than 11 million gallons of fresh and salt water, enough to fill roughly 17 Olympic swimming pools. It houses whale sharks, the largest fish species alive, animals so enormous that the aquarium had to engineer tanks specifically scaled to them. The Ocean Voyager Gallery alone contains 6.3 million gallons of water, and certified divers can scuba inside it, alongside the whale sharks themselves. What makes the aquarium genuinely unforgettable is the sense of scale. Ocean Voyager features an acrylic viewing window so large that when you stand in front of it, the ocean stops feeling like something behind glass. It starts feeling like the glass is simply the boundary between two worlds, and you are standing on the edge of both. Fact 13. Atlanta was burned to the ground and turned itself into the capital of the South in under 20 years. When General William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta in 1864, he ordered the military infrastructure of the city destroyed. The fire that followed consumed a huge share of Atlanta's buildings. What remained was rubble, brick chimneys standing alone, in fields of ash, and a population that had scattered in every direction. Yet by 1880, Atlanta had not just recovered. It had surpassed its pre-war population, rebuilt its commercial core, and was already positioning itself as the economic engine of the post-war South. By 1900, it had established itself as the regional capital for banking, journalism, and education. The speed of that resurrection remains one of the most remarkable urban rebuilds in American history, a city that treated its own destruction as a starting gun. Fact 12. Coca-Cola was invented here, and Atlanta never lets anyone forget it. On May 8, 1886, a pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton took a caramel-colored syrup he had perfected in his laboratory, carried a jug of it down the street to Jacobs's Pharmacy in downtown Atlanta, where it was mixed with carbonated water and served as the first glass of Coca-Cola ever poured. Today, Coca-Cola products are consumed more than 1.9 billion times every single day in more than 200 countries. The World of Coca-Cola Museum in downtown Atlanta is one of the city's most visited attractions, a place where visitors can sample more than 100 different Coca-Cola variants from around the world, including flavors so aggressively strange they have become their own kind of cult legend. The fact that the most globally recognized commercial product on Earth traces back to a single pharmacist on a single afternoon on a single Atlanta street still feels improbable, no matter how many times you hear it. Fact 11. Martin Luther King Jr. was born here, and Atlanta preserved nearly every piece of his world. The Sweet Auburn neighborhood along Auburn Avenue is one of the most historically loaded streets in America. Within a few city blocks, you can stand at the house where King was born, walk through the Ebenezer Baptist Church where he and his father both preached, and visit his grave alongside his wife, Coretta Scott King. The Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park (NCOM) passes roughly 35 acres of continuously inhabited historic neighborhood dating back to the 19th century. What makes visiting this place genuinely moving is not the monuments or the museum plaques, it is the scale of the ordinariness. The house where King was born is a modest Victorian on a tree-lined street. It is a reminder that the people who change history tend to start in places that look exactly like everywhere else. Fact 10. Stone Mountain is one of the great geological oddities of the American East, and it erupts straight out of the Atlanta suburbs. The granite dome of Stone Mountain is the largest exposed mass of granite in the world. It rises 825 feet above the surrounding Piedmont and stretches more than 5 miles in circumference at its base. An enormous bare rock dome formed roughly 300 million years ago when magma intruded into the crust and slowly uncovered by erosion over hundreds of millions of years since. The granite is so dense and so resistant to weathering that while everything around it wore away, Stone Mountain simply sat there, becoming more exposed with every passing million years. On a clear day from the summit, you can see the Atlanta skyline roughly 16 miles to the west, the Blue Ridge Mountains to the north, and a sweep of the Piedmont in every other direction that extends almost past comprehension. Fact 9. The Atlanta Beltline is one of the most ambitious urban transformation projects in American history, and it is still being built. The idea started as a graduate school thesis in 1999. A Georgia Tech student named Ryan Gravel proposed reclaiming the 22-mile loop of abandoned railroad corridors encircling Atlanta's core and converting it into a connected trail, streetcar, and greenway system, linking 45 neighborhoods. City officials ignored the thesis for years. Then it became a movement. Today, large sections of the Beltline are open as paved multi-use trails, lined with rotating public art installations, connecting neighborhoods that had been physically walled off by rail corridors for more than a century. On any weekend, the Beltline pulses with thousands of walkers, runners, cyclists, pop-up markets, food trucks, and live musicians, all soaking in the unmistakable energy of a city, actively reinventing its own geography. Fact 8. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the federal agency responsible for protecting the health of the entire United States, is headquartered in Atlanta. The CDC's campus in DeKalb County is the nerve center of American public health, the place where epidemiologists track outbreaks worldwide, where national pandemic protocols are written, and where laboratory work on the most dangerous pathogens on Earth takes place inside secure biocontainment facilities. Beyond its institutional weight, the CDC gives Atlanta something genuinely rare. The city hosts one of the highest concentrations of public health researchers, epidemiologists, and medical scientists of any metropolitan area on the planet. Emory University, also in Atlanta, works in deep partnership with the CDC and operates one of only 2 facilities in the United States authorized to store live variola, the virus that causes smallpox. Atlanta is quietly one of the most important scientific cities in the world. Fact 7. The 1996 Centennial Olympic Games transformed Atlanta on a global stage. Before the Olympics, Atlanta was a growing southern city, still working out its international identity. What followed was 85 days of transformation. More than 10,000 athletes from 197 nations competed across Atlanta and surrounding Georgia venues. Centennial Olympic Park, built specifically for the Games, became the city's new public gathering place and remains one of the most visited outdoor spaces in Atlanta today. The city that hosted those games still carries the Olympic fingerprint in almost every major public space built since. Fact 6. Atlanta has more Fortune 500 headquarters than almost anywhere else in America. Global companies headquartered in the Atlanta metro area include Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, the Home Depot, UPS, and dozens of others. This concentration of corporate power is not accidental. It is the direct product of Atlanta's position as the economic and logistical hub of the Southeast, amplified by Hartsfield-Jackson's unmatched connectivity and a business culture that has been deliberately engineered for more than a century. The result is a city where the global economy flows through the same streets, where you stop for brunch on a Sunday. Walking through Midtown Atlanta, you are surrounded by the headquarters of companies, whose products sit in virtually every household on Earth. It is an economic density that the city's modest skyline does not even begin to hint at. Fact 5. The Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area is a genuine river wilderness hiding inside a major metropolitan area. The Chattahoochee carves a chain of narrow gorges and whitewater rapids through the northern suburbs of Atlanta, and the 48-mile protected corridor is one of the most surprising pieces of true wilderness, accessible from any American city of Atlanta's size. Recreational gold panning is still legal along parts of the river because the Chattahoochee drainage sits at the southern tip of the Appalachian Gold Belt, the same geological formation that triggered the Georgia Gold Rush of 1829, 2 decades before the far more famous California Rush. Tubing the Chattahoochee on a summer afternoon, watching herons lift from the rocks and ospreys circle overhead, with the city's skyline completely hidden behind forested ridges, is one of those experiences that feels impossible until it is happening to you. Fact 4. Atlanta's food scene is quietly one of the most diverse and extraordinary in the United States. The city's rapid population growth has brought communities from every corner of the planet, and the culinary result is a metropolitan food culture of staggering range. Buford Highway, a single commercial corridor stretching north from the city into DeKalb County, is frequently cited by culinary experts as one of the most ethnically diverse restaurant strips in America, with authentic restaurants from dozens of cultures, including Vietnamese, Korean, Ethiopian, Guatemalan, Chinese, and Mexican communities, often within a single half-mile stretch. The soul food tradition rooted in Atlanta's African-American history runs alongside this international tapestry, giving the city a food identity that is simultaneously deeply Southern and genuinely global. James Beard, award-winning chefs have planted roots here, and the city's restaurant scene has grown sophisticated enough to be discussed seriously in the same conversations as New York and Chicago. Fact 3. The National Center for Civil and Human Rights gives Atlanta an experience that exists nowhere else on Earth. Opened in 2014 and located a few steps from the World of Coca-Cola and Centennial Olympic Park, the National Center for Civil and Human Rights holds personal papers of Martin Luther King Jr. alongside a globally curated collection of human rights artifacts from movements across the planet. What makes the museum unforgettable is a single exhibit. Visitors can sit at a lunch counter reconstructed from the Woolworth sit-ins of the 1960s, place their hands on the counter, close their eyes, and listen to a simulation of what protesters actually endured during those demonstrations. People walk out of that exhibit visibly changed in ways that photographs in a gallery cannot reproduce. Atlanta is the only city on Earth where the birthplace of the American Civil Rights Movement and its most comprehensive museum both sit within walking distance of where you park your car. Fact 2. Atlanta's theater and performing arts scene is large enough to make New Yorkers slightly uncomfortable. The city is routinely cited among the largest theater markets in the United States and has been for decades. The Fox Theater alone, a 1929 Moorish Egyptian architectural fantasia with a ceiling painted to look like an open night sky and stars that actually twinkle, hosts more than 150 performances a year and regularly sells out shows that Broadway companies use as pre-New York testing grounds. The High Museum of Art houses a permanent collection that rivals institutions in cities 3 times Atlanta's size. Between the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, the Alliance Theater, the Woodruff Arts Center, and a thriving independent music scene that has launched artists from Outkast to Lil Jon to 21 Savage, Atlanta has become one of the defining cultural production cities in modern American life. The creativity here does not feel regional. It feels like something the rest of the world is actively paying attention to. Fact 1. Atlanta is the city that flatly refuses to be defined by what it was, and that refusal is its greatest attraction. No other American city of comparable size has been destroyed and rebuilt, erased and reimagined as many times as Atlanta has. The Civil War burned it. The Civil Rights Movement redefined it. The Olympics introduced it to the world. The Beltline is reinventing its neighborhoods in real time. The city's motto, Resurgens, meaning rising again, appears on the official seal alongside a phoenix rising from flames. And it is not a historical flourish. It is the operating philosophy of a city that has turned reinvention into an art form, Visitors come expecting southern charm and sprawling highways and leave having experienced a city that is simultaneously older than most of its residents realize and newer than any of its history suggests. Atlanta does not wait for you to understand it. It simply keeps becoming something more interesting while you are still catching up. Now that you know these 20 incredible facts about Atlanta, tell us which one surprised you most, or which one has you already reaching for your phone to pull up flights. Drop your answer in the comments, and let's see how many of us land on the same pick. If you want to keep exploring the hidden geography and untold stories of America's most remarkable places, the video on your screen right now is exactly where you should go next. But before you do, hit subscribe and tap that like button. Otherwise, we may never see each other again.